In today's session, the ABCs of producing the best match for spot colors, we'll review some of the challenges of spot color matching and how you can differentiate your business by creating the best possible match for your customers. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, Lou Prestia, Product Line Manager, and Veronica Carlson, Senior Product Marketing Manager. So without further delay, let's begin our presentation. Veronica, take it away.
Thank you, Yael, and hello again to those who joined us 2 weeks ago, and welcome to those of you joining us for the first time. And before we begin, let's start by asking you a question. The question is, have you ever had a job rejected due to poor spot color matching? Let us know. Answer yes, no, or I don't know, and we'll pull the results later in the presentation. So let's start with the agenda that Lou and I prepared for you today. This webinar will start with the reasons why the graphic arts industry needs spot colors and why spot colors are so important to us. We'll continue with how spot colors are produced, where we'll show you a very visual and simplified way to understand how spot colors work behind the scenes. Then we'll get to know what are today's challenges of producing accurate and repeatable color, and we'll show you how using a DFE-based spot color editing tool can help overcome those challenges. And please notice that every time we say DFE in this session, we mean print server or RIP. So these DFE-based tools reside in the print server and are vital to achieve the best match for a spot color. After that, we'll present the 3 typical customer scenarios that illustrate the most common customer needs, and we'll demonstrate the way you can guarantee getting the color they need. And in the end of the webinar, I'll share with you some great resources for you to continue your learning. Now, Lou will start with ABCs of producing spot colors. Lou, take it away.
Thank you, Veronica. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I want to start by talking about why spot colors and why do we need spot colors. Another good way to think of spot colors is to think of them as brand colors. So you've probably had some designs come through your business where a designer used spot colors just as a way of picking, the right orange or purple that they thought would look nice in their design. And they may even have specified it as a spot color plate in InDesign or Illustrator. But chances are when you finally got down to the press, especially the conventional press, you converted that color to process because nobody expected to pay for a 5th unit on the press to print that spot color the designer had selected. When we think more about this and we learn about spot colors, we realize that the real reason for spot colors is not to give the designer more choices in the design application, but it's in fact to match brand colors. So there's some good example of brand colors on the screen in front of you here on this slide, and you can see that these are recognizable brands that we're all familiar with the color of. It's important to a brand owner or anyone associated with brand lifecycle management that these colors are always consistently reproduced. If I'm thinking about a national brand, I might have packages or other collaterals being produced 3 places in the country. So I might have a printing plant in Los Angeles and one in Chicago and one in Boston, all printing this package. And I need, when those 3 packages or those collaterals from those 3 locations arrive in some common retail location somewhere else in the country, I need there to be a consistent appearance. We think about an international brand, which most of our brands are international, including all the ones you see in front of you on the slide. The problem becomes more complex. Now I need to print the materials or the collateral or packaging, let's say in Boston and in Frankfurt and in Delhi, and achieve the same thing, that if ever those materials come into the same place on the globe, they'll all look exactly identical. Imagine if you were responsible for marketing Coca-Cola and you had the experience of going into a grocery store and seeing Coke boxes that were 3 different colors of red. Number 1, your brand integrity would be greatly compromised. Number 2, your sales would probably be impacted because users, or the customers that is, wouldn't know which box to pick up. Which red is the right Coke that we're so familiar with. The consistency of that brand is what keeps people coming back to that brand. When we study a little bit more about these spot or brand colors, we come to understand that the spot colors for a given brand are usually defined in something like this style guide that I'm showing you here. The style guide shows the exact colors that the brand uses, specified in this case in Pantone definitions. Also specifies a lot of other details you probably never even thought about related to brands in terms of how large or small the logo can be, how close or far away the type must be, how much white space must be preserved, whether we can reverse out type in some of these colors, etc. If we go on to another brand, this Heineken style guide is even more sophisticated, as you can see, representing a number of spot colors, also based on the Pantone library, and also representing tints of these spot colors and how those might be used in a particular design. The next thing I want to talk about is how spot colors are reproduced on a conventional press. But before we get there, I'd like to stop for a minute and ask Yael to share with you the results of our first poll question.
All right, so let's take a look here. Here are the results. Looks like almost half of our attendees today have experienced issues with spot color reproduction. What do you think?
Well, I'm not surprised. There's some challenges with spot color matching, partially being in the digital space to properly create and edit the spot colors and have the right libraries loaded on our DFE. Again, that's our digital front end, the thing we used to call the RIP, which does a whole lot more now and is really a whole print server for us, such as the Fiery. There's also problems with how the files are used in design, or how the colors are used in design documents, and we're going to look at some of the challenges of spot color matching from a technical perspective in this session. So I'm not surprised you've had trouble, but I'm hopeful that after you hear the rest of this session, you'll have some ideas, number one, about where to look for the problems, and I'm also going to share some tips and tricks that I use to troubleshoot and determine just what the root cause is. So when we talk about how spot colors are produced, on a conventional printing press, spot colors are produced with an actual spot color ink. That is to say, when I go to print the Heineken logo, I look up that Pantone color in my ink lab in the printing plant and actually mix that green color using some component colors that I get from my ink supplier that are licensed by in this case, Pantone, since it's a Pantone color. I mix that up in my ink lab, I take that green ink that I've made, and I go out and I pour it in the fountain of my press, and now when I run the Heineken job, I'm going to get exactly the right green. And I could do this in Boston and New York and Chicago and Delhi and Frankfurt and all the examples I gave and get a perfect match to that spot color by mixing that ink. The problem with that methodology is or was in the conventional space that it adds a tremendous amount of expense on a conventional printing press to make an extra plate and especially to run an extra unit on the press, not to mention to mix up that ink and then of course to wash up that unit before we do the next job. So for this reason, many spot colors, again the ones that weren't brand color critical but were just used by the graphic designer as a matter of convenience, were converted to process. When we look at how we reproduce spot colors on a digital device, you're going to see that we do in fact use a process build. So I'm going to use cyan, magenta, yellow, and black as I'm showing the way this Google logo is put together. But unlike the conventional press, I have a couple of advantages in the digital space. The first one is, as we showed you in the first World of Fiery webinar 2 weeks ago, there are cases where my digital devices actually have more gamut than a conventional press, which means I can represent more of the spot color library using process builds. The other very big advantage the digital printer has is that on the digital printer, courtesy of the DFE, we have color management. So where it used to be that I'd convert that Heineken green to one spot color build, and I'd put it in all my jobs, and they might run on different presses in different cities on different substrates with different inks, and look different every time. On the digital side, I'm going to take advantage of my DFE's spot color matching capabilities and the way it does color management to get an exact match to that color every time I print, even on different digital presses and even on the same press across different stocks or substrates that I may print on. To understand this, we're going to go back to a definition from the first webinar 2 weeks ago and talk about the gamut of the CMYK device. Remember, the gamut of the press is the total reproducible range of colors on that press expressed in device-independent color space. So that looks like this. I'm showing you here a plot of an output ICC profile. We're plotting all the colors that this printer can represent in LAB space. Remember, LAB is one of the device-independent color spaces that tells me not how to print the color or what the right recipe for the color is on my press, but instead it tells me how the color looks in the human visual system. So if I superimpose on this gamut the Pantone library, which I'm doing here, we have LAB values for all these colors. That's the definition in the spot color library on the DFE, is an LAB coefficient for each and every color. Doesn't tell me how to print it, tells me what it's supposed to look like. If I look at these colors here, these examples I've given you, you can see that many colors are in fact out of gamut. Those colors are not going to be accurately reproducible on this particular printing system with this particular paper because I don't have enough gamut. But if I open up the hull or the shell of this gamut and look inside, we can see that a great deal of colors are in gamut. Typically 50 to 60 to 70% of the Pantone library is within gamut of a digital device's CMYK capabilities on a high-quality sheet with a custom and properly made output profile. Let's look at a specific example here. So if I look at Pantone 356C, you can see that that color is well inside the gamut. It's well inside what we call the hull or the shell of this gamut, which means it's going to reproduce very, very accurately when I go to render it on my digital device. Let's talk about how this works in a DFE, or I'm going to give the example of our fiery digital front end for the digital press. A spot color, unlike anything else in a design document, comes in as a named color. So the actual color name will appear in the document, this Pantone color here. This means that I can use a spot color library on the digital front end, such as a Pantone library. There's some others out there that you may be using or your customers may be requesting. Toyo, DIC, and HKS are typically used outside of the U.S., but are also popular spot color libraries. With the right spot color library, I can look up the name of the color, and what I get out of the library is I actually get an LAB definition. Remember from our earlier session, LAB is the device-independent color space that tells me not how to print the color or how to project it on your monitor, but what the color should look like in the human visual system. Using that LAB value there, that tri-stimulus set of values there, and an output profile for the device that I've made precisely, I can convert to the right CMYK recipe or process build to match that color on the output device. So this is typically how spot color matching works on any of your DFEs for digital devices. The problems that we run into come when that color can't be found for some reason in that spot color library. In order for an application, a design application, to give you something like what you expect every time, there's a mechanism in place in the page description language, might be PostScript or PDF, so that if the spot color is not found on the DFE, there's some alternate definition provided, which might look close to this green, but isn't going to have the same level of precision as if we look it up correctly in the spot color table and use a high-quality output profile to convert the LAB values to CMYK. So the four challenges I want to talk to you about today are accuracy of your spot color printing, consistency of the spot colors that you print, challenges with design files, and this is the number one place, those of you that report you've had trouble, if it was an in-gamut color that didn't print as expected, very good chance there was a problem with the way it was designed or with the way you compared the design with how your DFE is set up. And then finally we'll talk for a moment about the topic of subjectivity, how the human eye perceives color and how this can sometimes get in our way when we're trying to satisfy one of our print buyers with spot color matching. So when we talk about accuracy, the key thing here is to use a CMYK output profile designed for your digital system. And as we said in the session a couple weeks ago, and I'll recap for those of you that weren't here, the manufacturer supplied profile is a very good quality profile. In some cases it's actually approved by the manufacturer. Certainly all the profiles we ship with Fieries have to be approved by the press manufacturer. But those profiles are made for a different engine than the one that you have in your shop. in a different environment, maybe on a different paper. So if you really want to precisely define the gamut of your print system so that color management can work 100%, we really need to make a custom output profile. The second thing we need is we need the spot color table, the LUT or lookup table is what this stands for, that we create using the output profile. And this is the case that I showed on the last slide, where we look up all the different CMYK tints for each spot color in the library for each output profile. Because remember, that device-dependent CMYK recipe will change when I go from one stock to another, one set of print settings to another, and certainly when I go from one press to another. In the realm of consistency, we have to make sure that our printer is in a known and repeatable state, and as we talked about before, this means that not only do we need to have a proper output profile created, we also need to calibrate the DFE. Calibration is the critical step that you take on a regular basis to keep the DFE printing in a predictable and consistent way. Without this, all the work you did to make your output profile won't give you the same level of precision from day to day or week to week or month to month. And so we will cover one more time here the very, very common question that I hear, which I think we even got some people asking in the last webinar after it. How often should I calibrate? We'll give some guidelines here. Certainly we want the print engine warmed up before we calibrate. Certainly a good idea to calibrate before a large, important job. Very important to remember that calibrating when you change media is recommended, since if you have a toner-based laser device, it's going to have some drift to it. If I calibrate for a paper at 9 o'clock in the morning and I don't print on it till the afternoon, that calibration may no longer be very valid after I've run my press a whole bunch. And finally, we have to pay attention to environmental fluctuations. So unless you're in the rare shop where you have a humidity and temperature-controlled press room, you're going to need to calibrate on a regular basis as temperature and humidity change, because they'll change the way the printing process works, or the appearance that we get from the printing process. So to remind you, the lower left corner is where we don't want to be. We don't have an accurate profile, and we're not calibrated, so you can see our colors are all over the place. Calibration, to give me consistency, means my colors get into a repeatable and expected location. I haven't got them where I want them yet, in the center of the target, but that's where the output profile comes in. Once I've calibrated the device, made the proper output profile, now my colors will be precise and they'll be repeatable from day to day so that I can reprint jobs and print things from a long time ago and still have the customer satisfied. And again, in terms of brand colors, still get the matching color for that brand that is sometimes the most important thing to your customer. In some cases, for a brand owner, more important than the way the process color looks and the RGB and CMYK sources and other objects in the file often take a back seat to the matching of the brand color that they stake their reputation on. So to talk a little bit about design file challenges, there's three problems that we face in the world of digital production of spot colors. The first one is a simple one, but I would be surprised if some of you have not missed this in the past. If the spot color in the design file is not named precisely the way the spot color is named in the DFE spot color table, you're not going to get a match. So if I create a file in Illustrator and I make a color Pantone 356C by hand, that is, I'm not pulling it from the Pantone library, I just type it in, I've misspelled this, so to speak, because I didn't put in the space between a number and the C that my spot color library expects. This means that this color, while it looks like a real Pantone color in the job, is not going to get looked up and color managed precisely. Instead, as I said earlier, we're going to get that alternate color definition, that color definition the Illustrator or InDesign puts in there to simulate the color, but it's not going to give us a precise match on our particular press paper with our print settings. The second challenge is the spot color not being found. So this is the problem where I've named the color exactly right. Here's a Pantone from the new Pantone Plus coded V2 library, very recently released by Pantone, and we just released this for the Fiery here in the last month or so. This is a color that needs a new library loaded on your DFE to get looked up. So in this case, Pantone 19-2047, this plum color, went into the design file properly, into the DFE properly. But when the DFE went and looked for it in the spot color library, if we didn't have the new Pantone Plus V2 library loaded, it's not found. And that means, again, we're going to get the alternate definition from Illustrator, which, as you can see here, might give us an approximation, but it's not going to give us the level of precision that a brand owner will demand. The third challenge in the realm of design files is that the plate is not present in the file. And you can sort this out with PitStop or with Illustrator for any file you might be supplied or might be creating. If I create a color like that Pantone color I showed on the last slide, or the FedEx colors that I'm showing here, and I don't make them separate spot color plates in the design application, then they won't be present in the PDF or the PostScript stream for the DFE to look it up. This is a very, very common problem. Designer makes a color, probably a great graphic designer, but doesn't know that much about the printing process. They don't specify when they create the color in the design application that this is supposed to be a spot color. Or another example is the job might have been designed in the past and converted to process for some affordable printing on a conventional device without having to use the Pantone inks. When we come to the digital world, we want to have the named spot colors as separate plates in this job because, again, unless they are, they're not going to be found on the DFE spot color library, which means they're not going to reproduce accurately. The last area of challenge is the area of subjectivity. I think we talked about this in our earlier session, but I'm going to remind you, color management only works in D50 lighting. Part of the whole ISO series of specifications for color matching and color management and precise and high quality print reproduction is that a D50 light booth must be the place the prints are evaluated. So as you can see here, our designer is thrilled by the match that they see from their Pantone fan book to the spot color we reproduced on the digital device. But if she takes that out of the booth, looks at it at her customer site or in the waiting room or in the car or somewhere at her home, she's not going to see the same match. So it's very important to remember when you're selling spot colors and talking to brand owners or brand people about matching their spot colors, and you do all the things that we're teaching you today in order to get the match, you have a calibrated modern D50 light booth so that you can see this matching occur. You're going to always be disappointed. This is an example of a REM strip, which I think is probably still available from Printing Industries of America, maybe some other international organizations. This strip shows me when I'm in proper D50 lighting because the stripes disappear as we see in the center here. So I think we have another poll question for you at this moment.
Yeah. So let's get your feedback on this. We want to know how often you actually edit spot color tables at your DFE. We have a few options here for you. Take a minute to give us your feedback, and Lou's going to continue the presentation. We'll share results a bit later.
Thank you, Yo. So let's talk about the tools that we use to do this on the DFE. And again, as I said last time, I'm going to give you some FireEase examples since we have lots of FireEase around here to show you this stuff on. The key components of your DFE spot color tool, whatever your DFE is that it needs to work with all your source applications, needs to be fast, accurate, and easy. But finally, it needs to meet some sophisticated color matching needs, which I'll talk to you about in a few minutes here. First, let's talk about how we use the Spot On tool, which is what we call the spot color tool on the FireEase, to reproduce a spot color. In this case, I'm going to show an example of a problem with a spot color that we'll solve with this tool. So on the FireEase controller, I'm going to my resources, to my Spot On tool. These are all my spot color libraries. And I'm going to look here in one of these libraries for a particular custom color that a customer is requiring. This is Pantone 282. I'm going to look this up in the spot color library. Sorry, it's 292. And what we can see when we double click on this color is we can see a problem. If you look under the LAB column, you see that triangle there? It's like your Gamut warning in Photoshop, right? This color is not in Gamut for the current output profile for the current press. Doesn't mean I can give up the job, right? I'm still going to have to print this. I'm going to have to communicate with the customer about the challenge we're going to have. And so the tool that I'm going to show you here is I'm going to print some variations. So those flower petal designs that you see there show variations on the color, ways that I could adjust it slightly to satisfy my customer. Once I print this, and again, in the D50 light booth, I'm going to look at it with my fan book, or potentially with my customer, and we're going to find the best match. If we find a case where the match isn't in the center of the center circle here, then we can click on one of these other, here we go, so we might click on that other option down here in the lower right corner, which will reset the spot color value or definition to match that slightly different blue, again, the one that satisfied my customer. So, this list of things we can do with the tool is to edit the spot color definitions. I just showed you a visual way that we let the customer do it with variations on a printed page. We can also edit these manually by typing in numbers or moving sliders around. We need to be able to create our own spot color libraries. Remember, there's cases where the customer doesn't know the Pantone color, and I've got to make a color for, you know, Bob's Tractor Red or whatever my customer might be. We also need to be able to import new spot color libraries, and the example I gave earlier is this new Pantone Plus version 2, which they just released. If you can't import that on your DFE, you're not going to be able to match modern applications. As soon as they start to pick this up, you're going to see these colors that aren't in your DFE spot color tables. We also need to be able to define spot colors or modify spot colors using measurements. This is for the case where customer doesn't know the Pantone color, or maybe it wasn't even printed Pantone in the first place, but they have a business card in their pocket and they want you to match that. Finally, I need to be able to export my spot color libraries. This is very, very important because if I have one station or one press where I'm defining a bunch of colors for my customers, and then I need to split that job maybe across multiple presses in my shop or across different locations geographically, I'm going to need to be able to share that spot color library across all my DFEs. Okay, and the example that I'm showing here that we're talking about here in the Fiery controller, digital front end, we actually export ICC profiles, what's called a named color profile. So the lookup table in there, rather than having a device dependent and a device independent color at each table entry, instead it has the name of the color and the LAB values at each table entry, and I showed you how that worked a little bit earlier. Let's look at 3 typical customer scenarios. We might consider these to be challenges of matching spot colors.
How about we first, before we jump into these customer scenarios, take a quick look at the poll results. I think it would be interesting to kind of see what people's reply was. So looks like a good portion just haven't done any spot color modifications yet. So there's a great opportunity after today's session, sounds like. Any other thoughts about these results?
Well, this is not surprising. I mean, it's an area that is not well understood. The typical problems are often surprise people when I go out and visit shops that, you know, why isn't this printing? And it's because it's not in the design file. It's not a plate where the name is wrong. I'll tell you a trick that you can use to find out if you need to edit your spot color tables. So let's imagine you have a job in front of you, or you will soon, that has a brand color in it. It has Pantone 386. It's not important what the color is. And you're printing it, and it seems like that color's not reproducing right. And you're wondering to yourself, is my DFE working right? Is there really a spot color library looking up Pantone 386? So of course the first thing you do is you take your PDF or whatever the source file is, you go into Illustrator, Pitstop or something like that, and you check the name. And it says Pantone 386. Perfect. Now, if you go to your DFE, go in the spot color library for that color and make a huge edit. So I'll typically write down what the highest value is of cyan, magenta, or yellow, and I'll set it to 0. Now I'll run one page of the job. The spot color should come out with that massive edit. So if it's a blue color and I took out all the cyan, it's going to not look blue anymore, right? Now I know that it's being looked up properly on the DFE. Remember to go back and fix your spot color table to put in the original value, and probably you need to do some other refinement, either adjusting or optimizing that color using DFE tools, such as we showed you when we have other colorimetric ways of optimizing on the Fiery, or it may be the case that you have a bad output profile, or you haven't calibrated, or that the color is out of Gamut. So that's a little tip for you.
All right, great. Thanks.
Let's talk about these customer scenarios. The first one is professional designer knows exactly what they need to do. They need to match the Coke logo. Okay? If I have a known spot color that I need to match, the main thing I have to do is just make sure the spot color library is up to date on my DFE, right? Remember again that Pantone is always improving their system, so while we have the Plus V2 that's come out recently, there was a Pantone Plus before that, and there was the 336 New in the middle, which is now part of that V2 Plus. Always make sure you have the latest library loaded on your DFE, provided you do, and you followed the other best practices that we're talking about, including calibrating and making a custom output profile for your actual press, paper, and print settings. You should have an excellent match on the first try. The second case is the one that I alluded to earlier. This is a customer that comes in and says, I need to match a spot color, but I don't know what the Pantone definition is. All I have is a business card in my pocket, and I need you to match my color because that's my brand, but I don't know who designed it, and I don't have the design file, and I don't know what the Pantone color is anymore. In this case, we're going to measure the color using a spectrophotometer so that we can get the LAB values and create our own entry and our own custom spot color library that has this color in it. Let's look at how this works. So here's an example of my customer that came in. This is Zipcon Consulting. They don't know what Pantone color that is or what spot color name that is, so we're going to connect our ES2000 as the spectrophotometer we're using here today. We have to calibrate the device. And then we're going to actually measure that business card into our spot color library. First, I'm creating a new group for this customer. Remember, this customer might have several brand colors that I need to bring in. Also, I'm hopeful that I get to export this spot color library and share it among all my DFEs because the good people at Zipcon have so much print work that they're bringing my business. At this point, I tell it to measure. Here we're measuring with the ES2000 spectrophotometer. And you see the result here. Good news, it's in Gamut. See, the Gamut warning is not present. We have the LAB values, and now we can look this up for our current output profile and also for all the other output profiles on our different papers and different presses and different systems. So I'm going to name the color. Reminder, this color, the Zipcon logo that I just used with the exact punctuation and capitalization and spacing, needs to be exactly the name you use in the design file. So another good tip for you is when you're creating a custom color, such as we just demonstrated, what I would actually do is highlight the color name after I type it, and I do a copy from my keyboard. Then I'd go over to my design application, and I'd create a new spot color, and I'd paste that name, so I know it matches exactly. Okay, let's look at a third challenge here. The third challenge area is consistency across different documents, and this happens particularly in the enterprise. Because guess what? In the enterprise, they're not designing everything with InDesign or with, Adobe Illustrator or a tool like that. This means that they have different documents from different sources which may not match their brand colors. And as I said earlier, in a corporate environment, this is the #1 job. They print a newsletter or something in their implant, or they hire you to print their newsletter. They want the pictures to look nice. They're probably snapshots from the office happy hour anyway. But they want the brand color to be very precise, the way that it looks on their business card and on their other materials. So let's look at 3 cases here. The first case is the professionally designed documents that I'm using within the enterprise, my flyers and brochures and product packaging, etc. These are professionally designed, meaning they're designed with a spot color. which we can look up and get a certain match on our DFE. The second case is I have letterhead and a bunch of other templates from an Office application like Microsoft Word where these colors are defined as RGB and have been for many, many years. When I take those RGB values and color manage them through my output profile and treat them, as Adobe RGB or sRGB or whatever I've set my source profile to, I'm going to get a very, very different appearance on the print than the color that was properly looked up through the spot color library. The third case is my legacy documents, which probably have things like EFI'S logos placed in them. Some of these were converted to process. Again, remember historically, it was very, very expensive to print spot colors. For every spot color you wanted, you had to pay for another unit on the press to print that color. So in the world of packaging and flexography where we have, 9 color presses, this is not such a great expense, or it is expected that you'll pay that expense. But if this job was being run offset, very good chance they converted that logo to process for the conventional press so that they didn't have to pay for the extra unit. Guess what? Same as the RGB, when your DFE gets that CMYK spot color definition, it's going to color manage it as Grackle or Fogra or Swap or one of these, and you're going to get a third appearance for your spot colors. So this is exactly the complaint that we hear from enterprise customers and from enterprise implant users. How do we solve this problem? Well, of course, we're going to use the magic of the DFE. I bet you're surprised to hear me say that. For the first case, in the case of the Fiery, we're going to look that color up in spot on, make a proper output profile calibration. We're going to get exactly the match that we expected. We can take our Pantone fan book in the light booth with that brochure, that printed piece, and we should see an outstanding match in D50 light. For RGB, I'm going to use a special feature of the spot color library, a feature we call substitute colors. What I can do is, rather than defining that Zipcon blue or whatever that I defined over there, I can go in and create a substitute color as part of my spot color library, and I can say that for this RGB value that you see here at the left, 119, 147, and 80, I can make an entry in the spot color table that says, when you see this RGB combination, rather than printing it color managed through the output profile, instead use the spot color definition. And I can tell it exactly what that definition is so that it matches the first case of the professionally designed document. In the third example, I can use the same trick. I'll have to make one more substitute color in my spot color library. This will be a substitute color defined in CMYK with the percentages that you see here at the left. And again, I'll map it to the proper spot color values from the first case so that I get a match across all my pieces, whether it's a professional document with the Pantone color named, RGB from an Office application, or CMYK from my legacy files and what might be EFI'S logos and other things that are challenging for me to update.
Very good. Thanks, Lou. I hope I bet the audience captured everything, all the great knowledge you share with us today. And so what we got today were the ins and outs of spot colors. We shared the most frequent challenges we face when producing them and how essential are spot color editing tools to achieve best match possible with minimum effort. Please start thinking about the questions that you may have for us at the end of the session. And next up, I'm going to be sharing with you the great resources that we have for you today. This one is specific to spot colors, and we have a white paper that Lou wrote about the easiest way to get the right color every time. This white paper will be made available to you in our thank you email we're going to send in a few days. And we also have a very comprehensive set of how-to guides related to spot colors in our how-to webpage. This is the URL. We'll be sharing with you that link in the thank you email as well. And as a reminder, and to reinforce Lou's message about being able to produce the new 84 Pantone colors, we have a webpage where you can go and download the latest libraries and get the guide on how to install these new libraries in your Fiery server. What you just need is a Fiery of any software version with the Spot Color tab enabled in Command Workstation 5. Basically, all Fiery external servers have the spot colors tool included, and some embedded Fiery servers may not. So please check before installing the libraries. But the spot color tool is also available as an option to those embedded servers that you may have. Again, we would like to remind you that because you registered for today's session, you have access to 3 online courses for free. And don't worry if you don't take down the URL and username and password we will be sharing with you today in the thank you email. But that's not all. If you want to capitalize the knowledge and experience acquired with the formal certification, we have another exclusive offer to everyone who attends all 3 webinars. We'll give you a 10% discount or $25 off the Fiery Professional Certification. So make sure you register for the 3rd session on April 30th. The details on how to use this coupon will be communicated right after the 3rd color webinar, the next color webinar. And the last session will be about matching industry color standards. Come learn about SNAP, Grackle, and SWAP. Yes, you've heard it right, SNAP, Grackle, and SWAP. We're going to learn about industry print references and standards. We want to remind you that we have a great new webpage that it will make very easy for Fiery users to find all the great educational downloads and support resources that we produce for you. Just go to resources.efi.com/Fiery. And lastly, we have other webinar programs from EFI going on right now, and these are related to EFI Print MIS and Web2Print solutions. Here's the list of upcoming events, and we give you the link to register to them. So I guess now let's go to the questions. All right.
We have questions coming up. Keep them coming. We'll get to as many as we can. Lou, let's start with the first one.
Okay, I'm just going to take it from the top here. So the first question I have here is, I'm using an Epson Stylus Pro 3880 for proofing. I understand this is not a machine you can calibrate. Well, print engines by themselves are not devices you can calibrate, particularly inkjet print engines. What you need in front of your Epson is a DFE. You need a RIP to drive that device, and I can't speak to all the supported models for the Fiery XF products, but I would start there. Take a look and see if there's an XF version that drives the 3880 from XF Fiery. We can certainly calibrate. We have very, very sophisticated spot color matching tools for the proofing space. The second question is, to address transparency in spot colors, specifically, how to use the Fiery spot colors for a solid with a photo and a drop shadow placed over it. Well, there's 2 things going on here. In terms of transparency, which is a good example of where a drop shadow would probably use transparency operator in the page description language, the spot color should interact with transparency properly. The only thing I can think of if you're having a challenge here is that you might be dealing with what is an overprint rather than a transparency case. There are limitations on embedded Fieries if you don't have the spot on tool. That is, if in your command workstation you can't get to that demo we showed you first today, then you probably have a case where your spot colors will not overprint. And that might be what you're running into there. I think at least some of you that attended the last session know that we're going to put up a FAQ with all these questions and answers in there, so I'll just make a side comment here. In a case like this second question, what you'll see in that FAQ, and you'll probably see in the FAQ after today's session, is that a specific problem like this, if you Google the Fiery forums and put it on the Fiery color forum, we'll get a whole bunch of our experts to look at it, and you can get really great information that way about solving problems with, sounds like a problem you're having with a job there. The next question says, if the file with spot colors has already been sent in CMYK PDF file, a form, then the DFE can't recognize the spot color. And they're talking specifically about Fiery and asking if they should set bypass conversion to get a more accurate spot representation, i.e. not converting through any profile. Well, if we set bypass conversion, all we're doing is turning off CMYK color management, for those of you that are not familiar with this. And in that case, you're going to get the spot color looked up, you're going to get the CMYK sent exactly as it is in the source file. You would have to be the luckiest printer in the world to be in a situation where the tint values that are in that CMYK PDF are exactly the right recipe for your press, paper, and print settings, right? We need color management to solve this problem. So what I would do in this case, since you are a Fiery customer, is I would go see what the CMYK values are, go look up the real spot color in Spot On, and make sure you pick the right output profile so the conversion is correct. Now you can see the recipe that you want for your output device, and at this point I'd go create a substitute color. So in the same place where I demonstrated adding that color for that consulting group, that ZipCon color, I can make a new group of substitute colors, add a substitute color, type in the CMYK values that are in your source PDF, and then the CMYKs that are getting looked up for the real proper spot color from the Pantone library, and you get an excellent match. The next question. Will all variations found in the Spot On tool be within the printer color gamut? Well, yes, by definition they will be, because they're going to be printed on the printer. So this doesn't solve the problem of out-of-gamut colors, that variations palette I showed you. This is a tool for you to sit with your customer and say, look, I can't match your spot color on this digital device. Could be that the device doesn't have the gamut, could be the paper they've selected, or it could be that it's, reflex blue, which you can't represent pretty much on any CMYK system very well. So we use the variations not to see what's in and out of gamut, but rather to sit with our customer and with our fan book from Pantone and pick something that's close enough or that's pleasing enough that we can satisfy the user. Next question. Can we manually import other spot color libraries if that library does not exist on our Fiery? How can it be done? The answer is you need to have the other spot color library in the form of a named color profile. A named color ICC profile. There are some old tools out there to do this. I think there's an old Graytag product that did this. This might be another good one to post on the forums. We today don't have a tool for you to bring in other people's spot color libraries. So depending on how large it is, it might, in some cases, be more efficient to just create it on the Fiery. Then you can save a named color profile, which pretty much all the modern DFEs in the world should accept.
Quickly, we have a number of people asking about reviewing this session and also viewing the previous session. The answer is all sessions are recorded and are available either through our website, and we'll provide links within a few days, or we have a YouTube channel. We'll also provide a link to the YouTube channel so you can view those, distribute to your colleagues, and so forth. Go ahead, Lou, with the next question.
Okay. So the next question is, when I use the spot color adjustment tool, I can get the color I want, but then I can't get it to apply correctly to the file. Exactly the case that I said. Either you don't have a separate plate in the design file, and you can use pit stop to see this very, very easily. You open up PDF and Illustrator. If there's spot colors in there, you go to the print dialog, the output tab, or output thing in the left nav there, you'll see the plates. And if you have pit stop, you'll see the additional plates. If there is a plate and it's not getting looked up, then the name is mismatched. And the best way to solve that is go to the DFE spot color library, copy the name, go paste it into the document using pit stop or Illustrator, replacing the old spot color name, and it should look up. Two more things to remember. You can do my experimental, you can do my trick, if you will, or my experiment, where you go change the value massively on the DFE to see if it's being looked up. The other thing is you can use some tools like the pre-flight that's part of the Fiery Graphic Arts Package Premium Edition, or our new Job Flow product, both of which have full-scale pre-flighting capabilities. Any pre-flight tool you have, either those or something else, will tell you all the spot colors in a job, and will tell you the precise names so you can see if they're mismatched in the spot color library, which is my guess is what you're running into there.
I'm just running the brief right here, so it can show you, it gives you a report of what are the spot colors that are present in that job, if any, and if there is any mismatch of spot colors. So in this job, for example, we have some missing spot colors, probably some typo in the spot color naming, and some spot colors were found and there is a match in the library. This is the quick way to do it.
Thank you, Vera. The next question I have here is, how are the tints calculated in DFE? This is a very good question. We didn't talk too much about this, but it's a fact that if I know the colorimetric values, the LAB values for the solid, I can do, and it's in Gamut, proper output profile, I can do a perfect job of matching. When the designer tints the colors, the color doesn't always tint colorimetrically as we expect. So the answer to the question is, we scale the LAB values colorimetrically for tints, which works well in some cases and not in all cases. There is a way we can patch a fiery so that it will scale in CMYK, which some customers prefer. In terms of the Fiery XF product for inkjets, there is actually, for proofing customers, already tools for adjusting tints and measuring tints and specifying the tints of the spot color in terms of their LAB values. In order to do that, you need a real press sheet that has the tints of those spot colors for you to measure, since those aren't typically supplied by Pantone in the conventional libraries. The next question. In regards to spot color matching and using Pantone swatches, I have the color bridge coded and uncoded. We print on Hammermill 28-pound digital copy paper, but it is not coded. The uncoded swatch books look very dull compared to my Hammermill paper. Well, two answers here to one question, so you get a bonus. Pantone has distributed for many years a whole bunch of different fan books. You guys probably have, what, like 20 fan books in your drawer, right? Only ones you care about are the solid libraries, Pantone solid coded, Pantone solid uncoded. The bridge libraries, the CMYK libraries, all those different books are books that were used by conventional printers to figure out what the heck tint to use on their conventional printing press to simulate the Pantone color. But as you can see in your bridge book, because every color is shown twice, once is the real Pantone spot color, and once is the tints very often don't match the Pantone spot color. So you'll see on your Fiery or whatever your DFE is, there is no bridge library loaded, because the bridge library is not a way that we would look up the real proper Pantone values. We'd use the solids. To the real question, yes, the uncoded book is printed on a certain kind of uncoded paper that may not have the same sheen or the same brightness or even the same color as the paper you're printing on. Remember that it's not the background color of that paper, but it's the swatch, the actual center of the uncoded swatch that I would expect would match for an in-gamut color if you're making a proper output profile for that Hammermill paper. Some people take a hole punch, small one, and punch holes in the fan book so that you can actually lay that swatch on top of your print, and then you don't get distracted by the surrounding paper color. Does Fiery Express for Epson have these tools? Well, you probably thought we knew everything in this session, and I am not clear on this, so I'm going to take this one and we'll put it in the FAQ when I get the answer. Certainly Fiery XF has full spot color matching capabilities. I think Express probably has a light version of that, but I have to go look at the product and I'll answer that one then. Next question. If you have a substitute color with RGB and CMYK, does it always come up that way? What happens if you need the true color that is RGB or CMYK again? The answer is yes. If you define a spot color, a substitute color, you are going to get that in cases where that color might randomly appear in the document in photographs, and it's a trade-off you have to live with. As I said, customers that are really concerned about brand colors are usually more concerned than they are about the way the process color parts of the job look. And in my experience, I've used substitute colors on hundreds of different examples, and I've actually never seen a case where it showed up in some at least obvious bad or errant way in the process builds or the RGB. Next question is, spot color edits only apply to the picked profile at the time. Sometimes this reserves to default. Well, this is a feature suggestion, so it's not really a question, but I will take that, we'll certainly take that into consideration. Next question, will an ES1000 do the same thing as an ES2000? Absolutely. ES1000 is a spectrophotometer, can be used with spot on, same as an ES2000. In terms of everything, remember that the ES1000 is only one measurement mode. Typically, if you have it in the U.S. or most places in the world, you have a UV cut device. If you look at its serial number badge, it says ES1000 UV or UV cut. The ES2000 can measure with or without the UV cut, so it's a little bit more functional. But for spot color measurements, this isn't really usually an issue. And remember, the light booths today typically have a little bit of UV in them, so this is kind of a changing topic. We have a question about webinars recorded. We are going to give you that link here before we finish. And there's a question about why aren't the colors loaded on the DFE? Well, you may well be talking about the Fiery there. The reality of developing a DFE, particularly for a digital press, is that the DFE is built, we start a year before that press ships. We get into a situation where we need to start doing quality assurance, and our partner, who manufactures the press, has their own people doing quality assurance. So there's a certain point at which we can't make changes. And that, yes, you can buy a Fiery today. It's not going to have Pantone Plus V2 on it because it only came out a short time ago. However, as Vera is showing you on the screen here, you can always download all the libraries for your Fiery. And I don't even know where this URL is. I just Google Fiery Pantone, and you'll find all the spot color libraries here that you can download and import onto your Fiery controller. For other DFEs, then certainly it is manufacturer dependent. I'm not sure what they do or how they distribute their libraries.
We'll include the link to this for all our audience, easy access with the rest of the information we'll send in a few days.
Okay. Next one is, how do you know if you have the updated Pantone library? Well, we name these very carefully. So if you look at your DFE or your Fiery today, you should see Pantone Coded V2, which is 2 versions back. You should see Pantone Plus. You should see the 336 new colors. Those were everything that was released until very recently here. And I suspect that after today, you'll download the new Pantone Plus V2. Remember, the V2 includes all of the old Pantone Plus, the 336 new colors from last year, an additional 82 or 84 colors that are new this year. If you get that new library, it actually replaces the old Plus and the old 336. So unless you've made edits in those, you can probably delete those and just use the new library. Can I elaborate on coded and uncoded Pantone colors? Well, there's 2 fan books generally, right? Because the spot colors look super dull on uncoded or matte finish stock, and the customer's always right? So we print on the paper that the customer wants us to print on and that they're going to pay us for. They pick a nice coded #1 sheet. We can make beautiful Pantone colors and have a lot more gamut to match them on a digital device. If they say, no, matte finish is what's in, it's what my designer says that our look and feel is going to be this year, then the colors are going to look dull, and you'll be very, very disappointed if you show them the Pantone coded fan book compared to your uncoded sheet. The uncoded book should match very well, and that means you need a different library, since naturally the uncoded, dull versions of the color, pardon the expression, are going to have different LAB values than the coded versions. What can be done with out-of-gamut color? That's the question for the ages. It's about, the answer, of course, is it depends. In some cases, you could try to pitch the customer on running it on a different press, running it on a higher quality sheet that you have more gamut on. If it's close, if you're talking about reflex blue or something like that, then that's that old, get to know the customer, explain to them the limitations of the printing process. Hopefully on the Fiery at least, you can use that variations tool that I showed you to show them what is possible, and generally print buyers are aware of this. So it's not uncommon for print buyers to say, yeah, I understand you can't match that, and they'll look at your proof and they'll say, but can you just make it a little redder or whatever they said, and that variations palette is a great way to say, you pick. Tell me which flower petal you want, and then you go redefine the color that way. How to set up the replacement colors on the Fiery is what we call the substitute colors. If you go into the spot color library where we showed you earlier, we can create a new spot color table called a substitute color table. We're going to give you a quick demo of this. And then within that, I can create a new substitute color. And for the substitute color, I'm simply going to enter the RGB or CMYK value from either my Office document or my legacy EFI'S logo or whatever I might have. Now I'm going to tell it the CMYKs to replace it with. Remember, before I do this, I'd go look at the real Pantone color with the right output profile, and I'd use those values. Okay?
All right. So we have, in order to respect everybody's time, I think we have time for maybe one or maybe two more questions. So.
Okay. We're going to get back to you with answers to all of these, and also we're going to post a fact, which I don't know if you read the fact from the last session, but it's fascinating to see what everybody asks, and I suspect if you read through the frequently asked questions, you'll see some things that maybe you weren't 100% clear on, that hopefully I clarify a little bit in terms of sitting down and answering all the questions. So the next one's about metallics. What's the best way to go about metallics? The answer is there really aren't metallics on any digital toner-based devices that I know about. Some inkjet devices can do this. Certainly in the conventional space we can do this. If you really want to print metallics like FX colors or something like that, you might need a standalone system that actually places those colors and laminates them or processes them so that they look like metallic. Tips for working with gradients. Not in particular. I told you that the tint value is calculated, and so that isn't always the desirable thing. There's a way you can change that. You can get a patch for the Fiery from our tech support that would do that, but a better approach, if a tint is wrong, is I would just redefine the solid and move the solid in the direction I need the tint to move just for that job. Remember, on the Fiery, at least, I can't speak for other DFEs, I can create my own substitute color library. And I can put in there Pantone 386, even though it's defined by Pantone. I can put in my own values for it. And then if in the spot on tool, whatever library is at the top and that list at the left is where the spot color is going to get looked up first. XF has the same mechanism for priority. So if I make a faux definition for 336 in a temporary library, put it at the top of that stack, now I can move that value without playing with the real Pantone library. When I finish, I'll move that special library down in the list under the real Pantone library so that the color is not found until the next time I need to work with that gradient.
All right. So I think that's all we have time for today. We do have quite a number of other questions, and as Lou said, we'll get back to each one of you individually and also provide a consolidated FAQ so everybody can take advantage of the great questions and the answers, of course. So thanks to our presenters, Lou and Veronica. Thank you, audience, for joining us and sticking with us through this hour. I hope you found this information very useful and informative. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible in 2 weeks when we have our final color management webinar in this part of the series. Enjoy the rest of your day.